Hi, welcome to another episode of MYD Global. I'm your host, Leanne Hackman-Carty. When it comes to looking at your risks, it's not something you can look at once, make a plan for, and then not think about it again. It's something you have to look at on an ongoing basis. In today's episode, I speak with Ryan Miller. He was the Director of Emergency Management for Howard County, Maryland, for over 20 years. He's seen a lot of disasters in his time. In fact, he said one of the critical points in his career was when he dealt with a flood that was supposed to be a 1 in 1,000 years that happened again less than 2 years later. So stay tuned as I talk to Ryan about the importance of risk management, how companies have to think about it in advance, and what he's doing to help them do so. So stay tuned. Hey Ryan, how are you doing today?
Great, thank you.
So before we get started, tell us just a little bit about your background.
Sure. Well, thank you, Leanne, for having me. My name is Ryan Miller. I'm the principal of critical functions here based outside of Baltimore, Maryland. My background is really in public safety. I started as a frontline responder, as a firefighter paramedic. About a quarter of the way through my career, I decided to go to graduate school after having been in a disaster environment on a family vacation in Florida. My eyes were open to this world of disaster management. I went, wow, I didn't even know this existed. So I went to graduate school at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., just before 9/11. And then after graduation was pulled into the Office of Emergency Management, which you can imagine was like just really growing their scope and their need for resources. So I was pulled in early in my career. And I spent 16 years in emergency management, ultimately retiring from Howard County Office of Emergency Management as the director. I spent the last 6 years there as the director of emergency management, and it was an incredibly fulfilling career. But I realized that it was time to transition, and I pivoted into risk management, primarily for mid-sized companies, often manufacturers.
So, Ryan, you and I have met through the Institute for Sustainable Development, and I know your background. I'm just curious, what I see a lot of is you don't have emergency managers and economic developers usually together in the same room, on the same page, practicing together. But I think you're seeing that more so, and I would be curious to know your perspective on how you see that relationship and the importance of it.
Well, it's essential, I think, now where we stand in 2020. But I didn't realize how unique that was, that emergency managers and economic developers wouldn't know each other. I thought that was happening in more communities in North America than is really occurring. Kind of rewinding the tape, just yesterday was the 4-year anniversary of the 2016 flash flood disaster in Ellicott City, Maryland. About 2 years prior to that, we approached our economic development office after having several other community disasters where we didn't have the bandwidth to interact with the business community. We approached our economic development office. A gentleman by the name of Larry Tweel said, we're all in, like we're ready to support you. But we really don't know exactly, I think Larry would be okay with me saying this, we don't exactly know what you're describing, but we're all in. And he really was. He brought his entire team to the table. They brought more people to the training in our emergency operations plan than any other department by like a factor of 4. And then 2 years later, we had this flash flood disaster in Ellicott City, and I was able to see, like, it really opened my eyes to the resources that they brought to the table that I honestly didn't even know existed. I was more of a traditional emergency manager. I was trained in to turn to normal resources like the Small Business Administration or potentially some FEMA type programs, but they brought this tool set to the table that I didn't know existed, and they did it from like day one, like literally holding the hands of the people who had lost their businesses, grieved with them, and then kind of walked them through a process of getting them the things that they needed, helping them. Helping their business survive those kind of first days, weeks, and months. Ultimately, to the point of 1 year later, we had a 97% business survival rate in Ellicott City, which is like kind of unheard of.
Mhm.
That said, and there's actually a FEMO white paper case study written about the Ellicott City experience, particularly around economic recovery. But less than 1 year later, we had a second flash flood disaster in Ellicott City. That was in May of 2018. And of course, the town's still recovering. We're not, fully back to where we'd want to be. This time last year, I mentioned I retired from Howard County and launched my own business, particularly just really having been changed by that experience, seeing businesses suffer such catastrophic loss and recognizing there were some practical things that could be done in advance to give them the best shot towards survival. But the town's still thriving, it's growing. And that model of economic developers getting to know their emergency manager is now being replicated in other communities around the country. And I think to the benefit of both the emergency manager, the economic developer, and the communities that they serve.
100% agree with you. Yeah, no question. I guess, the other thing I look at is a lot of times I don't think anybody can go through a disaster and come out the other side the same. I just don't think it's possible. And so in your case, I mean, you've been in the field for so many years, you've seen the front line, you've seen every type of disaster, you understand the importance of that intersection between the emergency management work and the economic developer. And now I know you've got your own business and you're teaching CEOs on the risk management that function. So I'm curious just if you can talk about what you're doing now, where you've decided you're going to take all your energy and put it.
Well, thank you. Well, this past year has been just that, like really zeroing in on, how I can best serve businesses, what type of businesses most at need. And what I've learned is just in the area of advisory services, there's often the middle market, as some might call it, or the lower middle market really is underserved with advisory services. So, and particularly so around risk management. If you said I want to develop a business continuity plan, like where do I go? Like most businesses would know where to start. They might access their insurer, they might access their accounting firm. But my background is, as we just described, like kind of street level and practical. So, what I try to do is help them build plans that from day one help give them the best chance of successfully navigating a disruption or a disaster, but also not from like a scary doom and gloom perspective, because nobody wants to be part of something that just from the outset is like all based on bad news. But I really do believe that it's value creating for the organization, like to go through the process of identifying, what's most important to your organization, what is your own business objectives, and then how do we protect those objectives? What are the most likely threats to those objectives? What kinds of information do we have to have on an ongoing basis to make sure that what we're doing is still going to give us the best chance of achieving those objectives? And that's all kind of positive. It's not meant to sound like spin, but I think that's the best way to start a risk management program and the best way to keep it alive and growing into the organization's culture and the way that they actually run things on a day-to-day basis.
Well, that's great. And I get where you're coming from too. And I think that that's the value you do bring to the equation, is the understanding of what actually happens during a disaster, the reality on the ground, and how you can help mitigate that. The things you can do now that are practical and not overwhelming, because I've seen all kinds of templates. I can go fill out a 50-page continuity plan and then never look at it. Right. But you're able to zero in on, so what really are your key objectives?
Right. And that's something, I mean, you get immediate engagement from the CEO and leadership team when you say, let's like what is it that you do? And I think COVID actually, it was remarkable to be able to be part of that process for a couple companies, because I felt like I was back in an emergency operations center, except I was in a boardroom with the dry erase marker saying, okay, like things are happening very quickly. We've got to make sure we've got our people, our systems, our facilities all aligned around the preservation of what's most important. So like right now, let's put it on the board. What's most critical for the survival of this company? And they knew all the answers. I just facilitated to get it out on the paper. And then as time has slid on, we're able to then refine that. But now that's our bearing point. Like, we need to make sure that at all costs, these are the things that are preserved. And that's, maybe without the pressure of COVID or a crisis, that's a more extensive day or week long business impact analysis process. But in the middle of a crisis, you can get to the bottom of what's most important pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And they know those answers, and it's something that they can rally around and kind of keep in front of them as time plays on and as the situation and the world, quite honestly, changes.
That's great advice. So Ryan, as we wrap up, is there anything else you'd like to mention before we close?
No, I just again, I appreciate the opportunity. As I warned you, passionate about risk management, passionate about helping businesses right now where they need all the help they can get, not get knocked off their feet by things that could otherwise be either mitigated or prevented. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to chat with you, and I'm glad to chat with you again in the future.
Well, thank you, and take care.
Thanks, Leanne.